Thank you very much.
Everybody, Lester Jones.
Hey, guys. You guys ready for this? We're all limbered up? All right, let's go. So, my name's Lester. I do economic demographic research for the National Beer Wholesalers Association. Prior to the NBWA, I worked for the Beer Institute, which is the Federal Trade Association in D.C., representing Anheuser-Busch, Miller Coors, Crown, Heineken, Sierra, all the big brewers. It goes down. I mean, we got Rogue and Boulevard and Omega and a bunch of other guys. But it's basically the federal arm of the big brewers in D.C. So been doing this for about 20 years. Ton of fun. I'm going to kind of give you a high-level 35,000 view of what I see the beer industry doing. I'm going to talk a little bit about the economics, mostly about the demographics, because right now I am on a demographic rant. Demographics is the destiny of the beer industry. We cannot avoid it. This chart up here is my favorite, most favoritist chart right now. We could probably spend a whole hour just talking about this thing, but it is a chart that shows how many people of each single age group exist in the United States. It starts at 0 to 1 year old, little toddlers running around on the floor, all the way up to 84 years old. Don't worry, grandpa is okay. There are 85 and older people in this world, in this country. I just chose not to put them on the graph. But this is where we are today, guys. This is 2017. This blue line right here marks the 21 age group. So that's all the people, to your left, that's all the people who are from 0 to 21, and then all the 21 years and older. Everything about this chart describes the U.S. beer market today, okay? Right off the bat, we are seeing fewer and fewer new legal drinking age consumers turn 21 every day. Has anyone read the Louisiana news about how they want to issue a 18-year-old drinking certificate? Do you guys pay attention to that? Guys, pay close attention to that, because I fully suspect that we will see more 18-year-old drinkers one day, just because this whole world of ours is getting older and older and older. All right, 3 out of 4 people in this country are over the age of 21, right? And when you look at the two demographic bubbles, you look at the millennial group and you look at the baby boomer group, and if you listen to someone talk about the average age of your drinker is 40 years old, how many people are 40 years old in this room? You guys are the most irrelevant demographic in this economy today. Congratulations. Stay hidden behind there. Leave it all to the millennials and the baby boomers to get all the attention. But when you talk about averages in the beer market and we talk about the average wage, how many people have heard all the news about the average wage in this country, how it's not rising? Think about this for one darn second. If you have 10,000 people who are 65 years and older and they are exiting the labor force, and they are paid a wage consonant with their experience, and you have 10,000 people entering the labor force every day, and they're paid based on that level of experience, are you in any way concerned that average wages are going up? They should actually be going down. The people that are exiting the labor force are much less productive than the people. No offense to the millennials here. You guys are worth every penny you make. But the person who's leaving that labor force at 65 years old is worth so much more to their employer than someone who's entering it. So the fact that average wages have been stagnant and only going up a little bit is astounding to me as an economist, because they should actually probably be going down, not up. In any event, this demographic here means that there's two demographic groups, millennials and baby boomers, who are the most formidable transitional point in their lives. They're graduating from college, they're getting jobs, they're forming households on the front end, and on the back end, they're actually starting to retire at an increasing number. So both these two demographic groups that are our core drinkers right now, they represent the most, 2/3 of the legal drinking age groups out there are in this. These 40-year-old guys, sorry guys, we're irrelevant in terms of the demand that's impacting our market. Anyway, when you look at where we were in 2010, everything clearly has shifted, except for that millennial group has gotten a lot larger and that baby boomer group has gotten a lot older. In the last 7 years, our country has just progressively gotten more older, and we haven't started replicating, we haven't started reproducing. is really what it is. There's no echo boom. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, though. When I look at Arizona, I kind of see very much the same thing. I see a much larger, you guys know that, right? This is not a shock to anyone here in the room, but I see a much larger 65 and older population, but also a lot stronger millennial population. And also, you guys do something that most states don't know how to do, and that's keep people who are just graduating from college in the state. If you go to New Hampshire, if you go to North Dakota, if you go to Ohio or Illinois, what happens is once they graduate from college, they all pack up and move out of town. And then you see this thing. But you guys have this nice group of people that stay on past, which is really good for you guys in that it provides a solid young base of consumers that you actually need. Here's 2010 versus 2017. It's kind of cool because you do actually, I don't know if I have a little lightsaber on this, do I? No. But you can kind of see how that millennial, 10 years ago, you didn't have that big. The red line's the 2010 number, black line's 2017, and you can see that huge millennial population that's just appeared over the last 7 years in this marketplace. And, now keep in mind, this is 0, that's 8, it's close to, 80,000 people in each one of those things. That you get up there, all of a sudden, you're at almost 100,000. That's a 20% increase in the total number of people that you just have in that core legal drinking age consumer group. Tons of fun, guys. But what's it mean when you have this diverse population? Because you really do have two radically different population bases in this market, and in the U.S. in total. If you think about it, for the last, since the baby boomers kind of really first entered the marketplace, we've always had what we call a normal distribution. We've always been focused, honed in on that normal distribution, which was the baby boomers. But what's happened, guys, is that this bubble kind of moved away, and now we have two targets. So when you look at your marketplace, you can't look at it focused. You can't be laser focused on it. You almost have to have two different focuses. That's what's so different about the consumer base today, is that it's not a normal distribution. Talking about the average age of 40, or an average income of $50,000, or an average of 2.1 kids per household is probably the most distracting thing you could do. All right, let's talk about a little bit of the consumer demand side of this equation here. This is Scarborough data. Scarborough data is a service, all right? It's from the Nielsen Company. They survey about 80,000 households a year. 80,000 households a year. They ask them all kinds of crazy things, like, did you buy a car last year? Did you smoke cigarettes? Did you watch TV? Did you buy a magazine, read a magazine, do a newspaper? Hundreds and hundreds of questions. And one of those things they ask them is, did you drink a beer in the past 30 days? And it's an indicator. It doesn't give us a volume. It doesn't tell how many beers you drank. It just said, hey, check this box if you drank a beer in the past 30 days. And what you get is you get beer, wine, and spirits, and they even have a craft beer segment. And they just do an index, 100. So it's a representative of what's the share of that group to the total population, and what's the incidence of them saying they consume. So if here's the craft beer line, 25 to 34, it's way up there around 160. That means they're 60% more likely in that age group to drink a craft beer the past 30 days than in general. And you kind of get a feeling here from beer, wine, spirits. I got all beer in there. I got wine, spirits. You can see this demographic flow of consumption across the age groups. And clearly that craft beer really does well in that 25 to 34-year-old. As you go down to 35 to 44, things get closer to that index line of 100. And then down here, when you're in 65 plus, everyone stops kind of slowing down when they drink once they hit 65. And it also becomes, there falls down there, wine kind of holds the thing. But what you see is that two things. First of all, what happens as those demographic groups that we are so familiar with now in our millennial groups age? What are they going to do? Are they going to hold to the brands and hold to the styles of beer that they like? Do those 21 to 24s maintain this profile, or do they adopt what these guys are drinking today? It's not, when people tell me that consumption habits are fixed and that they're not brand loyal, I take that as a little skepticism. I think that people are open to advertising, marketing, and demographics and economics that will change their behavior. So I don't look at this as a dismal future. I look at this as pure marketing potential. How are you going to attract and retain your consumers? There is differences between genders. We just had a whole little presentation on it. I mean, I line this up from craft beer, imports, light beers, liquors, ciders, and wines. And clearly, the male-female demographic, when you look at that, craft beer has a long, long way to go to convince the woman consumer to buy it and drink it. Obviously, the imports start gaining, light beer gains, liquor reigns, and there's the wine over on the other side where it finally, women's preferences to drinking over the past 30 days supersede those of men. I may imagine that. And at the same time, there are racial and ethnicity hurdles to be had when you look at Asian consumers. And you can see Asians right there. They prefer craft beer, which is obviously, I love this slide because most people don't realize that. While they represent a very small proportion of the population of the United States, they way over-index on the consumption of craft beer. And at the same time, you can see down there in craft, you have your black, and then the Hispanic ethnicity. As Dr. J pointed out, Hispanic ethnicity is not a racial category. So there's black, white, and Asian as a race, but Hispanic ethnicity sits aside because you could be any one of those two. That's why I kind of separate those guys out. But once again, there's lots of opportunity here to grow these markets. So, talking about the future demographics. I love this study that just came out the other day. It talked about how the American dream is alive and well with millennials. They actually do all want to have a house, have a job, and form a family. They're just struggling to get to that point. And the wine industry right now is absolutely terrified of millennials doing this. I don't see us being as scared as these guys are. This guy, Rob McMillan, he's Silicon Valley Bank. He's kind of like Bart Watson and my equivalent in the wine industry. He is absolutely terrified of the eventual substituting of diapers for wine in the millennial category because they have done such a good job in adopting younger drinkers these days. But they know that as baby boomers retire and hit those fixed incomes, that whole high-end wine segment is going to take a hit. And they also know that as millennials start to form households and get busy and do the things that you're supposed to do as Homo sapien, they're going to start substituting high-end for diapers and other things like that. So these guys are incredibly bearish on the outlook for the wine industry, particularly the high-end wine industry, because they see the inevitable demographic shifts that are going to fall on these economies and these states and these markets. So anyway, there he is right down here. Coupled with the specter of less baby boomer spending and consumption by millennials, the inability to spend on wine, this changes our dynamics greatly. So something to be aware of because like I said at the beginning here, these demographics, we age every year regardless if we like it or not, and we age as a group. And as we move down this line, everything about how we consume, where we live, what we buy is going to change along with it. So what are the states that are actually leading the baby boom? I looked into 2016, 2017 data. I compared the two. And there are actually states that are actually seeing a slight little echo boom from these millennials. The U.S. population that is less than 1 year old fell between 2016 and 2017 by about, 0.5%. But when I look around the country, I see this whole western part of the country actually experiencing a baby boom. When you go to Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, all these parts of the country have seen little slight baby boom, not a big one. It's just the beginning of the millennial baby boom that you will be reading about in the next couple of years. Very beginning. But it's good that you keep families and businesses in your community, because if you're up here in the Midwest and you're out there in the Northeast, it's going to be tough times. This is going to be very tough times because those places are depopulating. They're not having kids, and it's not going to be such a real happy world in that in those parts of the country that can't grow their population. And when you grow population, you grow demand. You grow demand for everything, including beer, including craft beer. I went too fast, my apologies. So like I said earlier on at the very beginning, we are becoming a much older country. 3 out of 4 people are over the age of 21. Our total drinking age population is roughly 240 million people. We are growing as an alcohol consumer market. And everything is different, guys. Everything is different. Who remembers the old VFW? Here's old enough to remember VFW, Elk Lodge, Moose Lodge, whatever. Okay? This is my favorite story that I talk to beer distributors about, because when they look at the marketplace and they see, we've lost 10, 20,000 traditional bars in this country over the last couple of years. Bars are closing left and right. We've seen huge shifts in the retail landscape. This is a story that I love to show people. It is the VFW, it's the American Legion in Hollywood. When these millennials found this establishment and they looked at the back of their menu, the menu read, the advertising, the people that are advertising in the back of their menu were cremation services and old folks' homes. And I think there might have been like some flower guys in there too, just to keep it complete. But the reality was, this is the defunct, dilapidated, dying on-premise establishment in the heart of Hollywood. These guys got together with the older members and rebuilt this place. And I haven't been there. I can't attest to whether the Wall Street Journal was correct in their assessment, but it is labeled Hollywood's hottest private nightclub that has cheap drinks and free parking. So when you look out here, when you go out in the, in your marketplace here, and you see these establishments that might not be the best place, you got to think about how much opportunity sits in the marketplace already. So, but demographics drive our industry, and it is a big divide to go from this millennial demographic over to that baby boom demographic. But at the same time, access to alcohol is expanding at an incredible rate. Everywhere I go in this country, everywhere I look, I see access to alcohol growing. And I just read the news today that the stadium, the Wildcats now can serve alcohol. We have it at UT in Texas. And all of a sudden, we see these universities starting to cave and starting to allow alcohol access in their college games. But everywhere you go in this picture, this is just a couple of samples that I pull up, but everywhere I go, there's an increasing amount of alcohol available. And the reason why is because, guys, 75% of us are over the age of 21. And when we're over 21, we do like to drink alcohol beverages, despite what you may read in the news. I don't know if you guys are reading in the news, have you read this, that people are not drinking because it's unhealthy? Have you read this? Have you seen any of this news? No one? I got a couple of head shakes. So if you read some of the popular press, you read the New York Times, you will look into it and you will see some hints that people want to be more healthy. And they're not drinking as much alcohol as they used to. And it's kind of growing in terms of how often and how frequently I see this piece of news, but it's confounding because everywhere I turn, I see someone else selling another alcohol beverage, whether it's at a stadium, whether it's the barbershop, whether it's a movie theater, whether it's a tap room. This is a Bed Bath & Beyond, guys, a Bed Bath & Beyond that has vacuum cleaner bags, Keurig K-cups, and craft beer all lined up with each other. You can grab your vacuum cleaner bags and your beer at the same time. It seems to be just proliferating. And it amazes me that if you were a child of the 90s and you remember the war on drugs and the Mothers Against Drug Driving and the Students Against Drug Driving, you think back then, how would have we responded as a group of people if your governor came on the TV on a Saturday morning and encouraged you to get in your car and drive out to your local vineyards or your local tap rooms and sample all the great alcohol that your state has to offer? Literally, that's what we have today. We have public officials promoting people getting in their vehicles and driving around to sample all the great beverages we have. That would never have happened in the 1990s, never. And here it is suddenly, the cultural shift is here. Alcohol is everywhere. It's a ton of fun. And at the same time, the number of establishments that sell alcohol are growing. And since the end of the Great Recession of 2010, we're over 600, almost 650, we're probably 700,000 licensed retail establishments for alcohol beverages in the country. Hardly a sign that we are drinking less. And at the same time, the number of people that are making alcohol beverages has more than doubled. From brewery permits to distillery permits to winery permits, Washington, D.C. has 5 permitted wineries now. Has anyone been to Washington? Has anyone seen a vineyard? I don't know if Trump's got one growing in the backyard there on the White House grounds, but it's amazing that we have 5 permitted wineries now in Washington, D.C. And what that means is that there's over 25,000, almost 25,000 manufacturers of alcohol beverages today. I mean, that's astounding. We've never had that many people making alcohol. And the majority of them are pushing up against those 650, 700,000 retail establishments. They are pushing up against 1,000, maybe 2,000 wholesaler distributors. So it's becoming a very, very crowded, a very, very fragmented market that is increasingly more difficult to work in, because I'm going to show you in a second what all this means, but we're going to talk about it in a second. In any event, I threw up your permits at the end of the year. Arizona, 130 permits out of 8,863 totally. Obviously California has over 1,000 permits. I mean, guys, we had 50 permits in 1950, all right? We had 50 breweries. Most of these states here have more breweries than the entire country had in 1980. And this is the additional purchase. In 2017, while the craft beer industry was slowing down from double-digit growth to single-digit growth, we still had 1,600 people belly up to the bar and ask the TTB to give them a TTB permit to brew beer. 1,673. Arizona picked up another 20. And to a certain extent, you can base this all on permits per 100,000 people. The U.S. on average has 3.7 permits for every 100,000 people. You guys are a little bit below that at 2.4. You're nowhere near as close as Vermont at 17 brewery permits for every 100,000 people. You don't have anything close to what Montana has at 12.5, but if you throw in the cows, it comes down a little bit more reasonable, down to about the national average if you count cows in the per capita number. But it's very diverse, and every one of these markets and every one of these craft beer markets are very different than each other. So that's a little piece of information you can hold on to. And at the same time, even in 2018, it hasn't really slowed down. When I checked the numbers for 2018 so far, they're still kicking out 3.5 permits per day in the first 3 months of this year. And it's nowhere near the 4.6 that we had in 2017, but that 3.5 is still better than any number that we had post-2010. It's crazy how we're going. And the reality is total beer industry is still flat, guys. This is the beer industry. It is pretty darn flat. It runs about 17.4 million barrels every month. This is a 12-month moving average, all the way up through 2000. This is, I think, through May of 2018. But you just average that number out. It's pretty darn solid. So it's not growing in volume. We're not selling any more beer, guys. We're just dividing it up amongst many more accounts. And when the population is growing 1%, the beer industry is flat. Naturally, you get that declining per capita consumption number that you'll hear people talk a lot about in the industry. Back in 2010, we were around 28 gallons. Now we're down to about 27 gallons per person. Still 50% of the alcohol beverage market in total, but it's not what it used to be. It is a slowing industry in total when it comes to volume of beer. A lot of it has to do with price. This is the consumer price index. These numbers got all goofed up when I brought them in. But anyway, this is 2008 is kind of when I look at the U.S. beer market and I say, how are we doing on time? 9:40, are we good? You just tell me when you want me to stop, because I can keep rolling. But what really happened is the beer industry has become super premium. It has in 2010, the mix of low-end premium and high-end beer was nothing like wine and spirits. I mean, we were struggling to move our category from kind of a Joe six-pack, Budweiser, Bud Light kind of pricing environment to something that was a little bit more high-end. It didn't help that InBev bought AB and they had $11 billion to pay off. It didn't help that Miller Coors got together and they had a lot of money to pay off. But collectively, as craft beer became more popular and as the big brewers pushed up price, we saw our pricing against wine and spirits roughly 20% premium on pricing relative to wine and spirits. Wine and spirits didn't raise their prices aggressively through the 2010 to 2018 period as the beer industry did. But we had to do that because we, as a group, as an industry, have become progressively much more high-end and focused. And that's why you see that giant gap between the pricing on wine and spirits versus beer. 20% premium over a 10-year period. And a lot of other things changed too, guys. I mean, we now push more alcohol in our 12-ounce servings than we ever did before. If you go back to 2010, you take all the beer that we sold, and I do an average weighted ABV. I take the number of cases of Bud Light, multiply it by 0.42. The number of cases of Coors Light, multiply by 0.42. The number of cases of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, multiplied by 5%. I think it's 6%. Oof. But anyway, I get hundreds and hundreds of brands, I get their volumes. And what I found every year that I do this is that we keep selling progressively more and more alcohol in each one of our servings. So naturally, you're going to see a little decline in volume because you don't need as much alcohol out of those same cases as you did before. So that's going to drive case volume down a little bit too. That's just by segment. Craft, I calculate the average craft beer runs about 5.4% ABV. Obviously, nothing like, light at 4.2 or even the imports at 4.7, And it's, obviously, your Schlitz malt liquor and your Colt 45 is up there with your Steel Reserve and your Mike Hard lemonade and things like that that are a lot higher in ABV. So this is where it gets interesting, guys, because we as a country are very much consistent consumers of alcohol beverage. And when people tell me we're drinking less, I call malarkey, hogwash, whatever word you want to use to describe it. This is the bar. Yellow bar is beer, orange is wine, reds are spirits. I equalize all the volume each year, and I divide it by the population, and I have an estimate of how much pure alcohol people get from their beer, wine, and spirits. So if you're a hardcore beer drinker, when you go home tonight, you basically look at 1.3 gallons of pure ethanol sitting on your table. You have the whole year to drink all that ethanol. You can mix it with whatever you want, but it's 100% pure alcohol. He's like, I drink a lot more than that. No, you're wrong. This is an average per capita. It includes the 21-year-olds and the 85-year-olds as well. But you can see the yellow bar has been declining for beer. But what I like to do is stack those bars on top of each other, and I get this magic number, 2.5 gallons of ethanol per person per year per household. Per person, right? And it's pretty darn consistent since 2010. So it comes down to a couple of drinks a day. It's right along the USDA guidelines that you should drink, men should drink 2 glasses and women should drink. You net it all out. It actually makes us look on average as a very moderate consuming country of alcohol beverages. But it also means that no matter how many more bars, restaurants, establishments, tap rooms, or anything else that you open up, you're not going to create any more demand. So growing access to alcohol doesn't create demand for alcohol, because the demand for alcohol, guys, it's 2.5 gallons. So Colorado's like 3 gallons, Utah's about 1.5. There's huge variations across the state when I do this exercise on each state. But when you average it all together for the nation, I get 2.5 gallons. And that's just a look back on ethanol share. There was a time when wine and spirits was very close to beer back in the 70s. Beer's dominance through the 80s and 90s and 2000s is unparalleled, in the history of brewing in this country, and its subsequent decline from 2010 to 2017 in the rise of spirits. I mean, we know what's going on here. We can see clearly the cocktail culture, the millennials preferring spirits over beer, the early parts of their career, the pricing structure, all those things to tell that story. But before I get run out of time, I do want to explain one thing to everyone about the beer industry. This chart. It fascinates me when I look at this chart because I look at 1977 as a point in time when the beer industry was the most consolidated. We had 50 brewers in this country. We had some importers, but it was less than 1 or 2% of volume. You had some Spaten, some Heineken, some Elephant beer, some, give me some other obscure import brands from the 70s, but there wasn't a lot. And when you look at the top 5 brewers, AB, Miller, Schlitz, Pabst, and Coors, these guys held 70% of the U.S. beer market. 70% of the beer market. These are companies that were started before the Civil War, 1852, 1855, 1849, on down the line. These were some old, well-established brewing companies in our country. They had 70% of the beer market in 1977. Let's look at and you had maybe 40 guys sharing 3 out of 10 beers. 40 brewers that got to share 3 out of 10 beers in the marketplace. Let's go over to 2017 and take a peek, and what happens? We have this thing called AB InBev. It's a formation of a company from 1852, but it's also InBev from 1366. Can anyone tell me what happened in 1366 in the world? Go to Wikipedia and put in, what happened in 1360? Like 3 things happened. A brother killed his brother to take a king. Some Moor created a hospital, and they started the Stella Artois brewery in Belgium. I mean, they didn't do a hell of a lot in 1366, but they did start a brewery that, amazingly enough, is still there today. So for all you guys that have your breweries, think about the history that is behind this industry, and think about just how ingrained the industry is in our culture. It's absolutely amazing. And then finally you get down here and you can see that their share is still, the top 5 share is still 80%. It is still a consolidated industry. Nothing's changed. We've had a craft beer revolution for 25 years. What happens in revolutions? People lose their heads. Everyone rejoices and scampers around. They start a whole new society. I mean, we had a craft beer revolution 25 years ago, and they're still holding 80% of the market, guys. It is a tough battle out there in the U.S. brewing business as it is in the global brewing business. And that chart kind of nails that stuff home. And like I said, you have over 6,000 people competing for 2 out of 10 beers. It's amazing how much it's changed. What else do I got in this deck? Oh yeah, I can talk a little about distributors. Distributing, how am I doing on time? 3-4 minutes. Yeah, so just real quick, and everything, I'm in the distribution business. So, for me, brewing is about making boatloads of cases of beer and then spreading it out across the marketplace and getting it to consumers as quickly, as efficiently, and as fresh as possible. When I look at the beer distribution industry and I look just how it's changed over 10 years, I can see a lot of things changing. I see the size of the markets almost doubling from 400,000 people to almost 800,000 people. The square miles that the typical distributor covers, the density, the number of people per square mile, the number of SKUs they're covering, all these things just add up to a much more complex marketplace because we have grown so many brands and we've created so many SKUs. And this is just the typical SKU count for a typical beer distributor in this country. They've gone from roughly 200 in 1999 to over 1,000 in 2016. And at the same time, the complexity of the business has really slowed down how quickly that beer turns in the marketplace. With so much more product and so much more shelf space, so much more selection, things just don't fly off the shelf as quickly as they used to. But believe it or not, I love this chart because everyone talks about the consolidation of the beer industry. The number of beer and wine wholesalers has increased every year since 2001. Now, yeah, the big guys have all consolidated. You read about this every day. Another big distributor, whether it's wine and spirits side or the beer side, has come together. But every time that consolidation happens, it opens up a niche market somewhere. And that opens up someone with a truck to enter the marketplace and to serve as a wine and spirits or a beer distributor. It's amazing because people don't realize that. We actually, every day, see new people go to the TTB and ask for a malt beverage wholesaling permit. There's 11,000 people, businesses walking around with a malt beverage wholesaling permit today. 11,000. So it's not as stagnant. You read the popular press, you read the trade press, you read about the consolidations, that's what you get, but you don't get a whole bunch of this new niche market, small guys opening up and starting to do business. Well, that's about where I'll stop since I'm at 10 o'clock. I got more slides. Feel free to share this, Rob, feel free to share this stuff with you guys. It's most of this is all public information, except for a couple of slides, but you guys can have it. You guys have any questions? While we have some time.
I just have a question on your last slide. When you talk about increase in wholesalers, I know like AB InBev, they bought several different wholesalers a couple years back. Are those each counted as individual ones? Because I know they still operate
those are established. So in that data, it's counted as an establishment, a location. When you have a business, if you have a brewery, you have an ID that puts you as a physical establishment.
Okay.
And that's what we count, those physical locations.
Okay.
Lester, thanks for coming out. I have a question about what we see. Right over here. Hey, what's going on, bud? I have a question. We read in the daily trades constantly about craft slowing. Yet many of us that are on the smaller side are actually still pretty healthy. Where is this alarmism coming from, and how do you kind of define it and give us some advice, since the majority of people in the room here are actually growing?
Right. So the beer industry, like I said, is pretty darn slow. There's a lot of people that are impatient when it comes to looking at alcohol beverages, and when you look back at how long it took, 1852 is a long time ago, and AB's been at it for a long time, pre and post prohibition, and it really takes a long time to grow a market. And when I look at 2 and 4 week IRI trends, and I read the press, and everyone's all hot and heavy and panicky, I just kind of shake my head. We have a 3-tier system that brewers make beer. They typically sell it into distribution, and it fills up retail channels, and there's a growing number of retail channels out there. It's becoming increasingly more complicated and complex to actually keep up with the actual trends when things are growing. It's almost like we're comparing apples to oranges at this point when we look what happened in 2017 versus what happened in 2018, and we try to, we have to compare apples to apples. And I continue to be skeptical of, yes, there's a slowdown in the measured scanner markets. Yes, if you go to, if you're looking at a Fry's, in 2017 and what their shelf set looked like, and you look at a Fry's in 2018, you will probably see some alarmist things. But once again, there's a whole marketplace out there that's growing and changing every day. So part of me looks at those traditional channels of retail and scratches my head and says, yeah, things are slowing down. They don't look good. But at the same time, I see new permittees opening up. I see new channels of trade opening up. We got Whole Foods, we got Amazon, we have Drizzly, we have all these new ways of moving product through the economy that I start to feel a little cautious on exactly what the popular typical trends that we see are telling us. So, per capita consumption is down, but we continue to see dollars are up. AB, InBev, still, they may be losing share, but they're still making a boatload of money. And don't remember, they just anointed a chief owned retail officer, which means this is our tied house officer. I mean, they want to own as much retail and as much as a consumer brand experience, and globally, nationally, and statewide as you guys do. So your competitor is big, your competitor is hungry. Load up. Smoke them if you got them.
Back to your wholesaler observation that there's a lot more of these malt wholesaler licenses that are being pulled and everything like that. I was wondering if you have similar data to what you showed around the brewery consolidation that's happened and market share there, and if there's a similar sense at the wholesaler level that maybe we're seeing, the equivalent of however many thousand more wholesalers opening up, but the top 50 of them have gained major market share. I mean, in your slide with the top 5 breweries from 1950 to today, it's the other number that struck me is they went from 70% to 80%, and they've got 6,000 competitors now instead of 40. Right. Are you seeing something similar to wholesaler?
Absolutely. Okay. I mean, it's still those that consolidation in any industry that we have. In the economy as general, as you see consolidation, you continue to see opening up fertile ground for new businesses to enter the market. And I imagine if I could accumulate that same kind of data, we would see a very similar pattern to what we have in the brewing world. Would probably easily transpose over to the distributor world as well, and probably into the retail world as well. Once you got the Costco's and the Walmarts pushing all that volume, they did kind of knock out a bunch of the small guys, but what that consolidation into the chain world really did open up a lot of opportunity for small independent guys to come along, even though they don't hold the majority of the beer. But it's this thing has changed. There's no end game to the beer industry in the United States. It is an ongoing game, and it will continue to be competitive. It'll continue to be a tough fight. What the big brewers do, what the medium brewers do, what the retailers do, how the distributors act is all a finely tuned 3-tier system that really, I mean, you have to admit, we have the greatest beer business in the world. When you go anywhere in the world, they look at our beer market and it's, they're jealous of it. And, rightfully so. It's a great beer market. It's got, tens of thousands of great bands, great beers, great beers and great products to choose from. It's good. It's yummy. It's delicious. It's beer.
Do you see the future of like wholesale distribution, the reduction of SKUs? I know you put one thing up there as a path to profitability or increased, margin for distributors to kind of clean up overall. Like they may not get rid of the supplier, but get rid of, instead of 20 SKUs, they cut them to 5. And does that make them more efficient? And does that play into the hands of the larger consolidation piece?
Well, I think what we've seen is beer distribution as a business has gotten incredibly sophisticated in the last 10, if not 20 years. I mean, their ability, some of these larger distributorships have 4,000 SKUs in them. They can handle it. The question is how familiar is each individual brewer with their market? Do they know where their accounts are? Do they have a way of moving those SKUs in a proper way? I think what a lot of guys have done have pushed themselves way too thin in some markets where they can't really support it. And then the distributors looks at kind of a stagnant brand, and most of these distributors that I know are willing to give up those brands pretty quickly once they stagnate in the market because there's so many other new brands coming along. So right now we're definitely at a very interesting point in our beer market because we have seen this mass accumulation of SKUs and this mass accumulation of brands. How many more juicy, hazy IPAs are we actually going to want to put on the retail shelves? And the retailers are thinking about it, distributors are thinking about it, and the brewers are thinking about it. And we've seen a lot of guys pull back from their markets and try to retrench into their home state because we all do like local beer in the end.
Thank you so much for being here. I always enjoy your talks. When I was looking at the brewery, 70% with the top 5, we could look at the 2017 and say it took 70% for only 2 brewers to make. So instead of looking at it as a total of 80 with the top 5, the top 2 made the same amount as the top 5 in the previous.
They did.
So that's
Crazy,
even more scary. How does that trend appear to be continuing?
I took out my. I have a chart that shows the consolidation. I don't have it here, but let's go back. Where did I lose that chart? Was it? No, well, I lost it in the deck. You're right. They, as individual standalone companies, they've managed to maintain their market share basically through consolidation. And we've seen St. Archer fall. We just saw Four Corners fall. We've seen Carback. We've seen a lot of guys, fall into that big brewer portfolio. So they're not growing their, that slide that I showed you is as much a consolidation slide and how they've managed to maintain their market share and their market position through consolidation and not so much through. We all know that Budweiser ain't what it used to be in 1980 as from a market share perspective. So yes.
I have a question. We didn't even talk about cannabis or any other demographic shifts. Like a esoteric one I could think of is we're all relying on rideshare and it's going automated. And while that's cool for our industry right now, I think the shift is going to be toward automatic over-the-road trucking. Obviously,
yeah,
it's a big job, a top 5 job, easily in every state. That could definitely shift people's wages and income. What are the kinds of things that keep you up at night and those kinds of demographic things?
Well, first of all, cannabis does not keep me up at night. I think it's 2.5 gallons. When I do this for, keeps me up all night. When I do this for Colorado, it's 3.1 gallons. And it's been that way for 10 years. So Colorado is actually consuming more alcohol than average across the United States. They're a younger, more hip place than on average, but they haven't seen a decrease in their alcohol consumption. And when I do it in Oregon, and I do this math for all of the states that have legalized cannabis, I don't see a significant decline or even a measurable decline in the amount of alcohol that they're drinking. Beer is losing share to liquor and ain't losing share to cannabis. Any red herring that someone throws up there, if you want to grow your share in your market, sell against spirits, sell against wine. Don't worry about cannabis right now. I could say that from this point looking backwards. I can't say that, if someone shows up with a cannabis infused product and puts it on a shelf and retail right next to yours, that's not going to be a substitute. But for now, up to this point in time, it hasn't impacted it. Going on to the technology side, e-commerce, beer continues to be heavy. I don't see anyone dehydrating beer and putting it in a package. We tried the powdered alcohol thing. It got the big old boot from the regulators. So beer continues to be heavy. If you want to distribute it, you need trucks, you need pallets, you need people, you need guys putting that stuff on the shelf. E-commerce is great, but when you look at the alcohol relative to the light things like consumer electronics or shoes or all those other things that get packaged and get shipped off in the e-commerce world, I'm not as threatened by the e-commerce idea in the alcohol beverage space as most people are. I think beer has qualities that are going to keep it relatively intact in the 3-tier system, and it's going to need bodies to move it and manage it. And I think you guys said something about trucking too, but trucking is, we got to move beer around. So,
are there any other questions? Come on.
All right. Going once, going twice. I'm here all day.
Awesome. Thank you again, Lester.
Guys.